I'm sick of going everywhere by foot. I wish there was a better way to get around.
I want to ride my bicycle!
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, so here is the Pokemon Daisuki Club, known in the English version as the Pokemon Fan Club, but more literally translated as the Pokemon Lovers Club. In fact, when this place appeared in the anime, 4Kids did a typical 4Kids move and didn't bother to check if this is an actual place from the game that already had an established English name, and they just called it the Pokemon Lovers Club, even though it's called the Pokemon Fan Club in the English game. And if you're thinking Pokemon Lovers Club sounds a bit, suggestive, that's by design. Because if I talk to this chairman here, he seems to like his Gallop a little bit too much. And surprisingly, the dialogue with him made it into the English version fully intact. Surprisingly, even in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. So anyway, here's how this guy thinks about his Pokemon.
Oh, I just love my Gallop. It's cute, lovely, smart, plus amazing. Don't you think so? Oh yes, it's stunning. Kindly love it. Hug it when sleeping. Warm and cuddly. Spectacular. Ravishing. Oh, I want to come inside Rapidash.
Okay, I may have added that last part in myself. And then, of course, the Pokemon Special manga's adaptation of the Pokemon Lovers Club makes these implications a hell of a lot more explicit, and I am so fucking surprised that that made it into the English version. In both English versions. Technically, there are 3 English versions of the Pokemon Special manga, and none of them censored this, surprisingly. Like, here's some obvious references to tentacle porn, but here's someone getting slapped in the face. Will someone please think of the children? So here's a life lesson for all you furries out there. Next time someone tries to kink shame you for liking Pokeporn, you can kindly remind them that it's fucking canon, bitch! So anyway, now we've arrived at the bike shop and we can finally get...
Bicycle, bicycle, bicycle.
Yeah, exactly. So here's what's annoying about the bike in Generation 1. Since there's no hotkey button to put key items on, you have to go into the menu every single time. So I guess the next best thing to having a hotkey is to just have the bike at the top of the list, so at least you don't have to scroll down every time, but it's still pretty annoying. The other thing that may not be immediately apparent, but it does kind of get on your nerves throughout the course of the game is that in this generation, whenever you're on the bike music plays. Now that seems obvious, but in later generation they made it so that if you change the place, like right there, I switched locations from the town to the route, and in any newer generation, the route music would overwrite the bicycle music. But in this game, the bicycle music plays no matter what, whenever you're on the bike. And there's pretty much no reason not to use the bike whenever you're in an outside area or inside a dungeon. So by the time you're done with this game, you're gonna get sick of hearing this song. And to make matters worse, there's a glitch in some dungeons where you fall down a hole when you're on the bicycle, and then you're not on the bicycle anymore, but the bike music will still be playing even though you're not on the bike. So even if you're not even on the bike, you can't escape it. So if you're looking forward to hearing all the great route themes and like dungeon themes that this game has, nope!
Bicycle!
So now that we're back in Kuchiba City, I should probably mention that this is the place where you get the last of the 3 original starters if you're playing Yellow. There's an NPC outside in that version who gives you a Zenigame once you've defeated this town's gym leader. So that fisherman I just talked to is not the guy who gives you the old rod. That guy lives next door. I'm gonna go talk to him, but I'm not gonna get the old rod because, well, I'm not planning on using a Gyarados, and the old rod would just be another key item taking space in my inventory that I'll never be able to get rid of, even after I get the much superior good rod and super rod. So I'm just gonna continue exploring this town for now, and there's one thing I really want to talk about. There is an in-game trade in this town where you trade away an Onisuzume for a Kamonegi. Now the reaction that most people have to this is,
but why? Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
so Kamonegi has the reputation for being one of the worst Pokemon ever made. It's terrible in battle, and people look at it and go like, What is this, a duck carrying around a leek? What were they thinking? Were they out of ideas when they made this? But what if I told you you were wrong about this Pokemon the whole time? Kamonegi isn't a poorly designed Pokemon, it's just really misunderstood. It's just one of those Japanese things that flies over most Western players' heads. You see, Kamonegi is actually based off of the Japanese saying, Kamo ga negi o shotte kuru, meaning a duck comes bearing green onions, and speak of the devil, here's the guy who wants to trade me one. So since duck with green onions is considered a delicacy, the saying a duck comes bearing green onions pretty much means someone is just setting themselves up to be fooled. So in this case, you, the player, are the duck, and you're being fooled by trading a Pokemon with this guy, thinking you're gonna get something awesome in return, but instead you get garbage. So that's why you can't get Kamonegi anywhere else in the game, and that's pretty much the whole idea behind this trade and this Pokemon in general. It is designed to suck. That's also why I wasn't into it when it finally got an evolution. Everyone was like, Farfetch'd is so cool, finally Farfetch'd got an evolution. Because everyone, for like 7 generations, everyone was always like, why doesn't this thing evolve? It's terrible. And I'm just like, yeah, but it's meant to be terrible, and giving it an evolution would kind of defeat the purpose, and then they did exactly that. There's a reason it took so long for this to happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if the reason they're doing it now is because the franchise has become so globalized now, and it's not allowed to really be Japanese anymore, and now they're listening to like fucking the same Westerners who completely missed the point in the first place and kept screaming for a Farfetch'd evolution are now being catered to. And it's just like, it's just so sad how like everyone involved in the Pokemon franchise, especially in the anime but also in the games, it's just like people are just afraid of doing any Japanese cultural references at all because 4Kids has convinced them that Westerners hate rice bowls or some shit. And it's just depressing how this entire franchise has gotten so whitewashed because a bunch of localizers have pressured the Japanese creators into being ashamed of their own culture. So anyway, we're now on Route 11, and I was talking about Pokemon Special earlier, and guess what happens on this route in that manga?
Bicycle, bicycle, I want a bicycle race.
Oh, and another thing about Kamonegi is, what the hell is its English name supposed to mean? Farfetch'd? What's Farfetch'd about it? Like, did the localizers themselves completely miss the point and look at it and go like, a duck with a leek, well, that seems a bit far-fetched. Yeah, if there's anything far-fetched about it, it is that name. Speaking of terrible English names, there's one in particular that's like its own league of bad. And I'm of course talking about Mr. Mime. I've briefly mentioned this before, but the deal is, the English name implies that there are only male instances of the species. Now, of course, Generation 2 introduced genders, and that name ended up biting them in the ass. But the thing that most people don't know about this whole situation, and this is referring back to those interviews with the translator that I mentioned way back a few episodes ago, is that Nob, the translator, fucking called it from day one. He was like, hey, I think this is kind of a bad idea because, you know, there might be a sequel and maybe there's gonna be female ones. So this guy had the right idea from the start, and you know what all the other idiots on the localization team did? They laughed him off. A sequel, as if they're gonna make more of these games. What, female Pokemon? Is this guy out of his mind? So Cayce just evolved into Yungeller, so I'm gonna go back to the Pokemon Center and trade evolve it into its final form, which is gonna make it a really fucking overpowered beast that's just gonna wreck everything in this game, pretty much. Thanks to the Psychic type being absolutely broken in this generation, as well as having some absolutely godlike stats, and no, that way is where the Pokemon Center is. And in order to actually trade on emulators, I'm gonna have to switch over to a different emulator called TGB Duel, so I'm gonna see you in a second. So this emulator doesn't seem to support color, and also the sound sounds really jittery and terrible, which is why I muted it and am playing music that I edited in myself instead. So for those of you who don't know how to trade on emulators, I'm gonna put a link in the description to an explanation how to do it. Although, just a warning, there is one thing that the guide doesn't tell you, because I followed this guide step by step, and at first it didn't work. Like, it didn't recognize my save file. The emulator TGB Dual didn't recognize my save file. And it took me a while to figure out what was going on, and it's that TGB Dual doesn't support very long file names. So make sure that your ROM and the save file associated with it aren't named like Pocket Monsters Midori Japanese version 1.1 or something like that, and just rename it to like green.gb or something like that, and then it'll work. Just thought I'd tell you about this since the guide doesn't mention it, and I just wanted to make sure none of you have the same problems that I did. The cool thing about Trade Evolutions with emulators is that you can just open 2 copies of the same ROM with the same save file and only do the trade once instead of having to do the trade and then trade it back. So if you're doing with emulators, it only takes half as much time. On both copies of the game, my Pokemon has just evolved. Totally makes up for the awkwardness of having to control both games at the same time. So the trade is done now, and I wasn't finished with my rant about Mr. Mime earlier. I've seen people make the argument that the Japanese version has the same problem because of names like Koi King, as if using the word king in a name is in any way comparable to literally calling something Mr. something. Like, there's plenty of English names that use the word king as well, like, just off the top of my head, Sea King, Kingdra, and I've never once seen anyone just assume that there are no female Sea Kings. But for Mr. Mime, I still see people being convinced that there are no females just because of its English name. So here's the absolute badass Houdin that's gonna wreck everything from this point on. So the trade worked. I'm just gonna save, convert the save formats back to stuff VBA understands, and then I'll see you back for the main game again. So back in VBA, we have Houdin here. We can see it in all its colorful glory. Well, as colorful as Generation 1 gets anyway. And you know what? I still have some TMs here, and I'm going to teach it Thunder Wave. Paralyzes the opponent with 100% accuracy. So I'll head back to Route 11 now, and we're just gonna do one more battle for this episode just to show off Houdin. And maybe I'll actually pay attention during the battle this time. Yes, I know I used Vine Whip against a Zubat earlier. By the way, I always thought the sprite when you're on the bicycle in this game looks a bit weird. I know it's because the face is like 1 pixel further up, so they have less space for the hat. So it looks more like you're wearing like a police hat or something. So, here we go. Shorts boy, what do you got? Nidoran male. That is no match for Nidoking. Okay, I forgot to switch the lead to Houdin. So much for paying attention. Anyway, 2-level disadvantage. Let's see how we do. Okay, first of all, change the move order. Confusion, let's go. 1-hit KO. Well, it is super effective, but still. Nidorino, let's see how it goes up against its evolved form. Is it still gonna be a 1-hit KO? Yes! Well, with a critical, but I told you this thing was good. And immediately grows to level 17. Bye-bye. Arigato. Sayonara. Well, that fits just about right, because I'm just gonna switch my Houdin into the lead because I didn't do it earlier, and then...
Goodbye, everybody. I've got to go.